ever since Dune was released, it's had some fairly partisan and polarizing interpretations. Unfortunately, among the movie reviewers and film critics, it's been fairly disappointing because a lot of them weren't familiar with either the book or Frank Herbert, so they didn't do a very competent job of guiding people through the mythology. Luckily, there are some exceptions, and so here I'm going to be responding to Lord Dunn on his channel where he had a discussion on Dune Part One. It had a good mix of book readers and people who just saw the film on its own terms, and they're going to get into the issue of the Bene Gesserit and how they work, and does it make sense, does it not make sense, specifically in relation to Paul.
Any boys that they have, he's got to go. You can't have a boy if you're a member of the Bene Gesserits, apparently.
Do they kill them like the confessors do?
Probably.
I have no idea.
Oh my god, they probably do.
Yeah, something that's a little funny in the book is that they just talk about it casually. Oh, you were not supposed to have a boy. And when you're first reading it, you're thinking, wait, you can't decide that. And then they reveal later that yes, you can.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought they said. Well, I think they said the movie you're not allowed to train the boy to do it.
As well.
Well, when she was leaving, she was like, "Yeah, you're told to only have daughters."
So the question is, do they just like abort them if they're male, or do they take some kind of weird drug that makes it so that they can only have females?
I have absolutely no idea, but it seems like they are naturally still able to have male children, but they have to actively prevent themselves from having male children and only have female.
Yeah.
So,
what it probably is that hormones swelling around in the uterus, or is what causes the gender. Zygotes start out as monogendered, mostly female, and so they probably do literally have pills that changes the hormones that go into the pregnancy that changes the gender. Like space junk.
I don't really know too much about this because it's confusing because it seems to have two contradictory elements that are determining the sex of the baby that is born, with the hormones deciding, but also the DNA also decides. It's kind of confusing to me.
Huh. It probably is fudged. I bet. Did they know a lot about how pregnancy worked back then? And when was this book written?
1965.
Yeah, 1965.
65. Okay.
Yeah. Albeit it was written before that. So
Becca says, from what I remember
earlier.
from the book, it's to do with the Bene Gesserit having so much control over their minds and bodies that they can pick the gender of the child. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right.
They have
from my research, that's the impression I get is that there is something about consciousness being linked to genes or cells, and you can manipulate it.
Either way, they're a bunch of creepy.
Very interesting discussion onto itself about Frank Herbert and eugenics, because he did seem very consistently anti-Nazi and anti-Hitler, but with eugenics itself, it seems he had a very, very mixed mind. Now, I think the discussion for the most part was very accurate and fairly interesting. On that world-building question of, well, how do the Bene Gesserit kind of manipulate genes to produce a certain person? That, honestly, I don't care. But I'm going to do research on that because, yeah, it's an interesting question. I would assume he found a way to manipulate the genes in their body, so they probably can't determine. This isn't Star Wars. You can't just magically do things. But they could probably sort of shift probabilities, so you probably will get X or Y. I also want to be careful. I'm responding to this thing chronologically, so maybe they deal with this later in the stream. I will listen to the whole thing. But they kind of missed the big issue, which is not really the eugenics question per se. The reason this is important, that Bene Gesserit wanted a female, I mean, maybe it is a kind of sexist Nazi parallel where the Bene Gesserit are basically stand-ins for the Nazis. Maybe that's true. Maybe that is. And they have kind of this racial or sexist antagonism to men. But really the point was, Jessica needed to make a female because they were hoping to basically mate with House Harkonnen. In other words, Leto would produce a woman, and the woman would be mate with somebody from House Harkonnen. So the Baron would produce presumably a male heir, and House Atreides would have a female heir. The product of that union, that would be essentially the Messiah, and the Bene Gesserit would manipulate the Messiah and control the universe. That was the plan. But Jessica screwed it up by falling in love and producing a male heir. But by doing so, she accidentally did produce the Messiah, but a Messiah they could not control. And that's the essence of the story. That the conspiracy was going to go one way, but Jessica accidentally screwed it up. But in a certain sense, she fulfilled the prophecy. But the prophecy itself is kind of propaganda. It's just something they made up. But apparently it was real. They just didn't understand how it really worked. A lot of little ironic twists to the mythology. But I don't know if they sexist agenda that they don't like men per se. I mean, I don't think that makes sense. I thought that the union between the House Harkonnen and House Atreides would be a male heir. The point would be that they wanted a political marriage with House Atreides and House Harkonnen and manipulate both sides. But by having Paul, who's a male, the House Harkonnen doesn't have a female heir. They don't have anything to offer. That inevitably put them into conflict with one another. Now, you may be thinking in the back of your mind, for those who are passive, this doesn't seem all that weird. But if you know the books and know the mythology well, House Harkonnen and House Atreides are actually related to one another. So they're endorsing incest, but they're experts in eugenics. Wouldn't that produce basically some mental deficiencies or some physical deficiencies? That I don't know. I mean, that's very weird because Frank Herbert is not like other writers. He takes science seriously. There's a lot of scientific limitations in Dune. It's a lot of fantasy, yes, and a lot of science fiction, but he tried to keep it fairly grounded. So how does the incest create like this optimal eugenic product? I don't know. I mean, like we know for a fact that yes, royal families had inbred relations for a long time, but I don't think they produced optimal people from that. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be the genetics was more fine tuned because obviously, just because you have incest doesn't mean you're going to produce, quote, deficient male heir or female heir. But again, that is a kind of world building puzzle. Like, do they know genetics so well that they can finally craft the optimal Messiah? I don't know. It's an interesting question. But yeah, this is a very good stream. I do highly recommend Lord Dunn and their discussions. We have our disagreements over what is better or worse in terms of films or novels. He's also a big Wheel of Time expert. If you have issues with Wheel of Time, then yeah, he's very informative on that. I'm much more passive with Wheel of Time, both as a fan and as somebody doing research. Very interesting puzzle in terms of the Bene Gesserit and how the genetics and politics of Dune plays out.